Welcome back to another episode of Bridges, where we are building a bridge between marketing and finance, helping turn tactical marketing into financial outcomes by educating two sides of two different worlds on how they can find common ground. And today we're discussing a topic that may be the perfect overlap between marketing and finance, and that is pricing. We are going to be looking at how both sides can use pricing as a tool in their tool belt to help deliver better business outcomes. And as always, we're brought to you by Wayflyer and Final Loop, two incredible partners that have been a sponsor of this series since the very beginning and helping to educate our industry on the relationship between these critical components of business. So let's dive in. Today, we're talking pricing. For many years, I was a big fan of the Tim Ferriss podcast. And if you've ever listened to one of Tim's podcasts, you know that for a long time, there was a common question that he would ask every guest at the end of each episode. And that question was, if you could put a billboard with any message anywhere in the world, where would it be and what would that message say? And one answer that stuck with me for many years was from Mark Andreessen. And Mark, when asked the question, said immediately, everywhere in San Francisco, I would put this billboard right here. It would say, raise prices. And the point that Mark was making is that he believed that one, most software businesses were not actually operating at a marginal value at which they could ever make money or build a sustainable business at the price that they were selling at. And two, they had not really tested the price elasticity of demand. In other words, they were not clear on the relationship between the price of their product and the demand for the product itself, such that they could maximize the marginal value of sale. And today we're going to explore this idea, the price elasticity of demand, and understand how pricing is a lever that dramatically affects a business's ability to produce profit, and how marketing and finance both have a role to play in thinking about how we can use price more dynamically to better achieve business results. And to start, to highlight just how important a lever this is, if we go back all the way to the beginning of our very first episodes in this series, we talked about this idea of the perfect P&L. And we talk about 4-quarter accounting, this idea that your profit and loss statement is broken up into 4 distinct categories: cost of delivery, CAC, OPEX, and profit. But if we were to take each of those sections and decompose them into their component parts, one of the things that we would notice about cost of delivery is that oftentimes most of the focus goes to thinking about the cost of the product. Very little conversation actually goes to the price. And the reality is that the easiest and simplest way to actually improve your gross margin is to simply increase the price. But there's also another counter signal within that also has an adverse effect on margin that marketers can often take and use at their disposal in a way that impacts negatively the planned gross margin that the finance team or product development team had in mind initially. And that's around the discount rate. And if we look in particular at this moment in time in our e-commerce industry, you'll see this graph here. This is a graph of the average discount rate in the year 2023 for the month of March versus the average discount rate in 2024 in the month of March. And this reflects an ongoing trend that we see in the e-commerce business where the average discount rate is going up over time. Now, if we think about the implication of this, is it has a hidden effect on the gross margin of brands. Whereas if we were to just pull in a 4-quarter accounting table back in episode 1, those 4 sections with cost of delivery, cost of acquisition, operating expenses, and profit, we might see that the cost of delivery appears to be up in this scenario. But in reality, the cost of the product may not have changed at all. What simply changed was the discount. And we talk about how important it is to break out the composition of that revenue to understand these trends over time. But what this is telling us is something about price as a lever for customers in this moment. And it reflects that in every different market environment, that the price elasticity of demand changes. We know there are ongoing narratives in our world about inflation and customers' desire to have a discount relative to what is an experientially consistent increase in price over time. It's not surprising that right now, that relationship between price and demand is changing. And what I want this to highlight is that it is really important to understand that the idea that there would be one price for every variable unit that you have as a business for the entire history of your business is highly unlikely. And that we should begin to embrace price as a more dynamic component of our business in lots of different directions relative to the surrounding market factors. So to go into this topic today, we're going back to old school economics. If you took Econ 101, this is going to be revisiting some of these principles for you, but it's to remind ourselves as marketers about the effects that drive the relationship with customers and price. And to start, we're going to use this graph, which is known as the price elasticity of demand graph. And we're going to discuss this idea, the elasticity of price. And we're going to talk about it a lot. And so simply stated, this is a graph where on the y-axis you have price and the x-axis you have quantity. And the idea is to measure the relationship between a change in price and the change in demand. And so there's two different ways to look at this. If something is perfectly inelastic, the amount that you would sell does not change relative to price. And often the example used for this is gasoline. The demand for gasoline is often distinct from price. We all have cars. We have to fill them up regardless of price. We complain when the price goes up, but demand does not change much relative to price. It is a almost perfectly inelastic good. Whereas many of the other things that we sell are actually very elastic, meaning that price and quantity are sort of perfectly related to one another, such that if you increase price, you get a proportional reduction in quantity, or if you decrease price, you get a proportional increase in quantity. And that's an object that is perfectly elastic. Another way to look at this is formulaically. I always like to try and take words and turn them into their formulaic components to try and understand them more. But if we think about the price elasticity of demand as an equation where you have the percentage of change in quantity demanded divided by the percentage change in price. So imagine at $100 you sell 10 units. And if you were to get to a demand where you sold 15 units, so that would be a 50% change in price or 50% change in demand, and it happened at a 100% price change, you could get a ratio between these two things. And what we'll know is that if price elasticity is greater than 1, so if this formula produces a number greater than 1, then we consider the good to be elastic. And if it is less than 1, we would consider it to be inelastic. So let's look at this very quickly. So if we have a price elasticity of demand where you have a 50% change in demand on a 100% change in price. So let's imagine we had a wallet and we were selling it for $100 and we decided to increase the price by 100%. So we went all the way to $200 and we only had a 50% reduction in demand. We're making more money there, right? That price is considered to be inelastic. Whereas it's considered to be elastic if the change in demand is greater than the change in price. So in other words, if changing the price has a very dramatic effect, it's elastic, right? They move together. As one goes, the other goes. Inelastic would be one moves, the other doesn't really move, right? In particular, as it relates to demand. And as marketers, our job all the time is to think about how we can make our product more inelastic, such that we could change the price, namely increase it, and not affect demand the same amount. So what causes that? How do we as marketers think about our job and our efficacy sometimes as being measured by the elasticity of the demand? Now, we're going to stop and acknowledge that there are also external factors that contribute to the elasticity of demand. By the way, I'm just going to acknowledge real fast. This graphic is from a blog on SciSum that does a great job of outlining 7 factors affecting the price elasticity of demand. But I just want to highlight a few of these and think about some examples where the surrounding market conditions, as well as our individual actions as marketers, have the ability to affect the elasticity of price, or our ability to increase the price without changing the supply of demand, or such that when we do discount, we get a massive increase in demand relative to the percentage decrease in price. That's another lever. So it's not just about our ability to increase price over time. That's one way to determine something to be inelastic. But it's also to say that when we do run promotion, when we do run discount, the increase in demand offsets the decrease in margin or price. Okay, that's a really important attribute as well. So things that contribute to it. Level of competition. This is a huge one. So how easy is it to replicate the same value of product at a lower price? Okay, this goes for agency service providers as well as an individual product. If your product is a commodity, it ends up becoming very elastic in price. The availability of substitutes is a similar way of saying level of competition, but how easy is it to get the same thing? The price of the product to start, the time frame, the proportion of income spent on commodities, right? So this is a macro factor related to how much money people have available to spend on your good. Again, this goes back to some of the grocery or other items, is that there's only a certain amount of money that people have disposable to spend on that object. The degree of necessity, things that tend to be critical or immovable. Think of this as your electricity is going to be very inelastic in the sense that you need it every month. Now, you may toggle that demand a little, but tends to be that things that are absolutely necessary in our life become very inelastic. You can change the price and not change demand. Brand loyalty, the availability of information, and then the scarcity of the good itself. So, as a dramatic example, think about categories where we are seeing and understanding that price becomes very elastic. Let's take a market like the air fryer, where suddenly you go from a hot object that has a novelty to it, that when it's initially introduced, then all of a sudden you get this massive influx of products that can substitute virtually the same experience at a lower and lower price. So what happens is that the demand at this price level versus the demand at this price level tend to be elastic, meaning that the demand is higher here than here, and it becomes very difficult to increase or drive increased demand at this price when the other options begin to exist. And I'll give you an example that I've personally experienced about a similar idea. When we launched Kalo rings, my brother and I had a lot of debates about what we should sell the product for, what the price should be. And we had all sorts of discussions around customer expectations of price, as well as what we thought it was reasonable to the cost, because a lot of times people think about pricing as sort of a cost plus model, meaning they take what does it cost to produce it, and then how do we create a reasonable stair step of markup off of cost. There's value-based pricing. There's all sorts of ideas of how you can do it. But one of the things that happens is that depending on the market that you choose, you have to be able to consider for yourself the actual capacity to substitute the similar value at a lower price. And when we started, Kalo had more of an inelastic price model because there was virtually no competition. So when we named the price at $19.99 to start, we were essentially setting the market. And even when we moved products up sometimes for limited edition offerings, or the demand was really inelastic related to the price. We could constantly increase the price and see a similar level of demand because there was very little substitute to start. But because the barrier to entry for this product was almost zero, there was an influx of demand that now if you go look for silicone wedding ring on Amazon or Google, you'll see thousands of results. And what you'll see is it got all the way to the point where you could buy 7 rings for $14.99. The amount of the cost to substitute went down so low that all of a sudden the price became very elastic. And that was a change in the market that we had to think about how to solve for from a brand loyalty, marketing, creating scarcity and messaging to try and reintroduce a reframe of our product from this competition and category. Now, when I use these examples, I don't mean to use them to dismiss our responsibility as marketers for how we can impact the price of a product and to create more inelasticity. It's more to just acknowledge the kinds of dynamics that exist that are contributing to the way a customer's willingness to buy a product is affected by factors that are not just our own decision-making. With that said, we as marketers must understand that our job in selling a product is not to drive just top-line revenue or even to think about the overall P&L. It's to think about maximizing the marginal value of every single SKU. An e-commerce business exists entirely on the premise that you could place an order for an individual set of goods and then maximally sell them to generate a return on the investment of each SKU. In order to do that, we have to acknowledge a really important fact about each SKU. First, it's that getting the price right is hard. And one of the best ways to do that is to use a real-time tool to help you reconcile and understand the costs of the goods, the size of the bet that you're placing. This is a screenshot from inside of Final Loop, partners that we use to promote this series, and a product that I am a huge believer in. What Leo and team are doing to help increase the visibility into the understanding a real-time view of your finances, including what you have paid, where your product is, the actual real-time COGS is such a huge component in understanding how to think about price. If we're going to maximize the marginal value of every SKU as marketers, we have to have the clearest view of cost that we can. And Final Loop is a great tool to help you do that. Okay. If we understand that our job is to maximize the marginal value of every SKU as marketers, which is going to be a mechanism to help increase contribution margin, to increase the overall profitability of the business, to increase cash flow as well, we should also recognize that the demand curve is not the same for all SKUs. So price shouldn't be either. Demand is not constant on an axis of time, and it's not constant on an axis of SKUs in our library. There is a wild variation of demand across the entire portfolio of products that we have. Each of them is in itself our own little bet or investment on potential future demand. Let me say that again. Each SKU you have is like placing a bet on the potential future demand of that individual SKU. And when you think about it like that, your POs get a little bit harder to place, and they require a deep and intimate sync with marketing around the mechanism that you're going to use to maximize the demand for that specific unit. And when I say that, I mean the size small of your jeans, the color of the wristband you're ordering. Each variant itself is a SKU that has its own demand profile. Let me give you an example of how the relationship between our existing supply illustrates for us the varying levels of demand. Okay. One of the reports that we like to use inside of StatList that helps us think about the variable demand relative to inventory position is the inventory dashboard. It gives us a few critical insights. One is how many units of a specific SKU we have remaining, the inventory value, the current inventory sales value. So think of this as the cost of these goods. This is the retail sales value at full price of those products. Then we have the average weekly sales velocity, charted here to give us an illustration of where that sales volume is trending. And then the corresponding days of inventory remaining, which is simply the remaining inventory divided by the average weekly sales divided by 7, right? That gives us the number of times 7, the average days of inventory remaining. Now, what that allows us to do then is to set up a state of inventory using an ABC letter grade that works something like this. If we were to take our inventory count divided by the average unit sales per day, or by week times 7, that same example I get, you would get days inventory remaining. Now, if you take the amount of days inventory remaining divided by the days of production lead needed to produce that product, you could create an inventory grade based on the amount of turns of inventory that you have available. You may have heard this phrase before, which is the idea of just-in-time inventory. It's the idea that the ideal state for e-commerce is that you are receiving your next batch of inventory at the exact day that you run out of your present stock, such that you are never out of stock and never overstocked. Now, that's a pipe dream in many cases. There's often a balancing act between these two things. But this idea of keeping an eye on the state of your inventory relative to the amount of turns remaining. So if that's days of inventory remaining divided by the days of production needed. So if we go back to the previous graph here, you'll see if we have 191 days of inventory remaining, let's say that's about 6 months, right? A little over 6 months, and the product only takes 4 months to produce, then we have about a 1.5 turns of inventory left, right? So you can see my inventory grade, we might assign values relative to how much inventory we're willing to hold on the balance sheet. Now, this could be related to the cash position of the organization. In other words, how important it is that we quickly turn inventory back into cash. This could be related to the likelihood that it goes bad on the shelf, or an increase in storage costs, or just a general market signal about the demand for the product relative to how much supply we want to carry. So each individual business is going to have a different inventory grade. Okay. So what we're discussing right now is how the health of the position of the inventory relative to your ability to get more in stock is another factor that marketers have to consider as it relates to price. So not only are there market components, how much demand exists generally at the present price, but there's also then your business's unique cash, and inventory position that affects how you as a marketer should think about price. And I don't just mean the actual MSRP or the retail suggested price. I mean how often you discount, whether you're willing to discount, and then the other lever component of price, which is the CAC or the acquisition cost you're willing to pay relative to that price. All three are different levers available to you when thinking about maximizing the marginal value of SKU. Now, another quick drop here for my partner, Waitflyer. When we're talking about inventory, oftentimes the hardest part of any e-commerce business is the ability to finance the purchase of additional inventory. And especially of businesses, if you're coming out of a struggle period where maybe your TTM EBITDA isn't really strong, or you have very little history as an early stage startup, sometimes the best financing available is the one that minimizes your personal obligation. So you're not on the hook in case you can't pay it back personally with your home or your kid's college fund or whatever it might be, and gives you access to capital quickly. Now, with Wayflyer, I've talked about this before. It is on you to do a great job of understanding how the remittance rate relates to the APR that you would expect to pay on any debt, and how 10% on a flat fee is not a 10% interest rate in the way that you might be thinking about it with your car or your home or anything else. If you pay this off in 6 months, it's functionally double the interest rate than you see here. So it's important to understand this, but the access to low risk capital personally is an important part of our ecosystem and something you should check out from my friends at Wayflyer. Thanks y'all for appreciate your sponsorship of this content. Okay, we're going to spend some time on this graph, okay? Because this is a critically important thing to understand for marketers as it relates to how a business's inventory position affects how you think about marketing strategy, okay? So what we're going to have here is a y-axis that shows contribution margin per unit. So we're moving just from gross margin, which would generally be reflected as the price you're selling it at minus all of the variable expenses except for ad spend. So this is your gross margin or your hard cost of goods. Your payment processor fee, your shipping, your fulfillment would give you gross margin, minus ad spend gives you contribution margin. So on the y-axis, we have contribution margin. Then on the x-axis, we have inventory age. And then on my right-hand axis, we have total contribution margin. So if we go back to this graph here, this idea that you could grade your inventory on these scales of 0 to 1.5, 1.6 to 3, 3.1 to 5, well, the age of the inventory, the days of inventory remaining, is the numerator that increases this inventory grade. So it moves your score up and moves then the inventory grade down. So in other words, you are in a healthy or good inventory position in the A level. You are starting to get to too much inventory in the B level, and you have way too much inventory, years of inventory potentially at the C level, such that there's a clear just break between the present demand for the product and the amount of product that you have. The market is signaling that your sales velocity does not match your supply. There's a break between supply and demand such that there needs to be a reconciliation or a change in tactic. Okay. So when we draw these three distinct areas, A grade, healthy inventory position, good relationship between supply and demand. B, we tend to get in excess of supply relative to demand. And C, there's a significant imbalance between supply and demand in this chart. Okay. And then on my right-hand axis here, we have total contribution margin. Okay. Think of this not as a per unit consideration, or where over here we're looking at per unit. This is the total value of a set of supply. Maybe you have 100 units. This would be the total contribution of the sale of all of those units. Okay. Now, marketers, here's how you can look at an inventory sheet and begin to think about how that affects your promotion of that product. It also helps you think about the life cycle of a set of products. Okay. Life cycle of a set of products and marketing strategy and how they relate to one another. Okay. In an ideal world, if we wanted to maximize the contribution margin per unit, okay? In other words, where demand is at the greatest level relative to supply, okay? So think about this as this graph. As we move from the left A grade over to the right C grade, you go from high demand, low supply to the opposite, high supply, low demand. And what is the corresponding marketing strategy that's required in relationship to that position? Well, if you could sell every unit that you had at full price with $0 spent in CAC, that is how you would maximize the marginal value of every unit that you have. Well, Taylor, how does that happen? What are you talking about? This happens from selling to your existing customers primarily through email and SMS. When you have enough pent-up demand from an owned audience, this can also happen when you are an influencer with a large audience that you can access at zero cost, and you're able to present a product for distribution in that moment and sell every single unit at full price and zero CAC. That is how you maximize the marginal value of every unit. It's also how you're going to maximize the total contribution in most cases. Now, oftentimes, it is not true that businesses can sell out the entire inventory set in that arena. And I would even argue, if you are selling out of every unit here, you are not maximizing the total contribution margin potential of your PO. You didn't order enough. We want to get to a balance between supply and demand that reflects that we maximize the total potential value of that batch of inventory. This would be a signal to me that you under-ordered. Now, there are moments where that is a necessary part of the planning process for the sake of driving a sense of demand or scarcity for your business. But in general, if you were able to sell all your products at full price and $0 CAC, you likely did not maximize the total potential of that batch of inventory. The second phase is to move out of selling exclusively to an existing audience and now using the product to capture a new audience at full price with an above target efficiency CAC. So before we get to selling at full price and target CAC, there's the idea that we could sell some batch of product. And if we think about going from existing customers into even warmer audience, maybe remarketing or lapsed customers via paid media, the next tranche of lowest hanging fruit, oftentimes we have an efficiency target that's above our new customer acquisition target, and we're able to sell still at full price using a above efficiency target CAC. And you can see as we move out this curve, we have the contribution margin per unit drops dramatically from here to here, because the second you introduce CAC, you're introducing some significant percentage decline from a $0 CAC to some above average target CAC. Whereas your break even might be a 50% CAC, a full price might be a 25% CAC, a 4-to-1 versus a 2-to-1 ROAS, if you're thinking about it that way. But you can see what's likely true is you're now capturing all of this value plus incremental value here. So your total contribution margin is going up. Additionally, as you think about this A-grade inventory, we should still not be using price or discounting as a lever yet, but we begin to get to full price at target CAC. Okay. So now we're getting to this phase, likely moving into the phase of new customer acquisition, where we are hitting that 2-to-1 target. We're selling the product still at full price, and we are beginning to grow the total contribution off this inventory set, still while the contribution margin unit goes below. Now, I want you to think about this dotted line here as being illustrative of break even. So at this point, at full price and target CAC, we should still be first order profitable. So you can imagine the gap between this dotted line and this cost per unit here as being illustrative of the profitability per unit. Now, as that inventory begins to age slightly, we move out of maybe just that 1.5 turns to the demand is not quite pacing as much as we had anticipated. Now we begin to think about the need to discount, where there has been a signal to us that the demand for this product is not matching our available supply. And this may happen across an entire product set. It may happen on a subset of products. It may happen only on edge cases, larges, smalls, extra smalls, color variants that were a little wacky, whatever it might be. And I would contend that the first action that we take when we get to the zero grade is to offer a discount, likely only to a subset of customers, maybe customers who have bought product A but never B. We sell them product B at a discount. We try and introduce an expansion of our customer portfolio and their product mix with a small discount. Doesn't need to be dramatic here, without using this in paid media. Because when we reduce the margin on a discount basis and introduce CAC, margin gets pressed quickly. But if we can go out with a discount to our existing customers at $0 CAC, that's the next most accretive action we can take off this inventory. From there, we move to discount and an above average efficiency target in CAC. So we ensure we're still making money here, but the inventory is beginning to age into an area that might be at risk. Okay? And this is an important distinction. I want to illustrate the distinction between these two stars, because this is where if we go back to marketers, sometimes we're thinking about the P&L, and sometimes marketers we're thinking about the cash flow statement. This is when those two strategies begin to diverge. And this is where we are holding so many things at once in marketing and why it's so important to understand the game that you are playing as a business, what the primary liquidation mechanism is as a business. Are you distributing cash? Are you looking for a sale event? Is protecting EBITDA matter? Do you have covenants with the bank to keep? Or do you need to create cash? How much cash do you have available to you? How important is it to turn aged inventory back into cash? How do all of these things affect your decisions as a marketer? But this point right here, this star illustrates the point at which you would maximize total contribution margin off that inventory set. Any action that we take to the right, all of these things down here are begin to deteriorate contribution margin, okay? But they do help with cash. So this star represents the end of the actions that we would take to maximize the P&L. This star over here actually is about the point at which we will maximize cash flow. Two different strategies, two different moments that have two different initiatives relative to the objective of the organization. So as we begin to push to the point where we are now selling discounted product at an above target CAC, we're pressing all the way up to the point at which we are now no longer going to be first order profitable. And this is likely when this inventory has aged into what we would call C grade, or a point where we're like, man, we have too much on the balance sheet. Whatever that threshold is, where the age of the inventory begins to be a point where it's like, this is going to eat up cash in a way that we are not happy with. And it is better that we recomprise that inventory back to cash to make a purchase into better quality inventory that we can maximize more marginal value on than to allow it to sit unused on the shelf where it deteriorates cash and can't be reinvested into better inventory. When we reach this threshold, we now begin to discount at target CAC, which likely means that we are going to be not profitable. And then worst case scenario, or what we would call a liquidation strategy, where the inventory is now proven that we cannot move it at the present price, at the present acquisition target, and we must now take a liquidation where we are losing money on a per unit basis, but turning it back into cash to make more inventory, discounting the product at a below target CAC. This is liquidated at all costs down as we get to this level of the spectrum. Now, every one of these actions is a tool in your tool belt as a marketer that you think about the job that you have to do, whether you are maximizing the contribution margin per unit or you are maximizing the total contribution margin, and where your inventory presently sits. If you are in an apparel business, for example, I promise you that if you asked for and put together a report that looks like this, you are going to find hundreds, if not thousands of SKUs that exist in this area that your business would be well served to liquidate, even at a slight loss, for the sake of being able to turn back into better inventory that can produce better margin in the future. Unless carrying that on the balance sheet is a way to protect the P&L in the short term. Because this action deteriorates the profit and loss statement, whereas this action inflates the balance sheet and hurts cash. So again, you can start to understand how just going out and selling stuff and running things on a promo to think about what the ROAS is all relative. The other action I see happen all too often from marketers is that we are running discount above average target CAC on inventory that is about to run out. This breaks my heart. We should not be paying an exorbitant CAC for inventory that's in low supply. We should be tightening. This is why another reason why cost controls are so important is it gives you a lever to tighten the efficiency relative to available demand and inventory, or relative to available supply, excuse me. So let's talk about this as an example of where now marketers, we begin to think about how to use these levers relative to opportunity. One of the reasons we talk about 4-quarter accounting is it gives us a rhythm as a business to think about timing supply. When we know the pace of our revenue and when we can create moments to drive increased demand and can plot that a year ahead, it allows us to make inventory a process that is synced to the marketing calendar. If you ever listen to Sean and Connor Ridge talk about this, they're big believers in 4-quarter accounting. They do it in an awesome way. And what it allows you to do is build a rhythm to your business. E-commerce is a rhythm business. One of the things that I think we've got lost in is this idea that you should be constantly trying to get to your maximum spend every moment in every month. No. You should be building an annual plan and executing against that with timing and pace and rhythm. Your ability to predict your future revenue is the mechanism by which you maximize the marginal value of every unit, because you can order supply that keeps you in that green zone. Now, the other thing I want to talk about as a lever that allows you to expand the margin profile is about limited edition drops, where you are leveraging scarcity as a mechanism to move price up and increase demand due to the scarcity of the product. Give you an example. This is Bruce Bolt. All of this is publicly information that's on their website. I'm not saying anything about the unit volume or the amount of money that they did, but I can tell you they just did a product drop with the king of JUCO, an awesome influencer and content creator. And if you go to their site, it is all sold out. Now, part of that you could say is bad planning relative to the amount of supply and demand that was available. The other part is to keep in mind for your customers a way to consistently move price up by keeping supply low. And it allows you to build into the customer's mind the idea that moments aren't marked by discount and promotion. They're marked by scarcity and increased demand for an awesome, better than normal product featuring something that you might love. This is a lever you can use to maximize marginal value against price. The other thing that I want you to start to study is the idea of dynamic variant pricing. If you go to Nike's website, you will notice that if you look at any of their SKUs, and that if you think about the Blazer Mid 77 Vintage, this is one of their best signature SKUs in the moment that's still on trend that people wear all the time. And if you go to the site, you will actually notice that every color and size has a different price relative to the amount of demand. So look at this. When you get to this one, the black one, no discount. Red, 78. Blue, 78. Green, 80. Dark green, 89. Black, no discount. Core SKUs, black and white and black, not available at a discounted price. Non-core SKUs at different sizes, low supply. You can see there's not a lot left. They're trying to move inventory that does not have the present demand at that existing price. Not all demand is equal across every SKU. This allows the business to reinvest cash back into the primary position of supply. And so if we think about this, we as marketers need to understand the sequence of inventory, the age of the inventory relative to its signal about what it means for demand and cash and P&L and maximum contribution margin per unit, and to think about how we could introduce a dynamism into our pricing to allow for SKUs that we were just wrong about the demand for to still be moved through and turned back into a cash so we can place another bet. So we can gamble again on a better mix of products to maximize the marginal value of every SKU. Every week at CTC, especially with some of our apparel brands, the center point of our growth strategy conversation revolves around this. What is the present inventory position across core SKUs? Is there anything that's aging out? Is there an opportunity to liquidate that for you? Is that a necessary action at this moment? Are there ads that we should turn off because we will organically sell out of the remaining inventory and don't need to introduce paid CAC into that margin profile? This is how you get to maximum contribution margin as a business. And it's where price is your ongoing lever. Now, you may have thought when we started this that we were just going to talk about the idea that you should price test, and you should, because you probably haven't found your total price elasticity of demand. But it's so much more than that. It's about understanding how the changing market dynamics, introduction of competitors, introduction of lower priced options, affect how consumers see your product and the elasticity of your demand. And then to understand how your inventory position and the bets you make are signals from the market about how much demand there is for the product at your price. So, marketers, go forth, maximize the marginal value of every unit of sale, know when you're impacting the P&L, know when you're impacting the balance sheet, and continue to drive predictable, profitable growth for your business.